So, ladies and gentlemen, it is a pleasure to be here. I guess I shall start. Well, I'm going to speak about the evolution of rule of law in the European Union, and I will focus just on some of its aspects. And I think that I have faced similar problems as Katarina in certain parts of my research. But let's focus on the core of my presentation. And the European Union, when it comes to rule of law and its evaluation, was inspired by mechanisms used by other international organizations and has defined its own processes for assessing whether a member state is or is not or complies or does not comply with the rule of law. And these processes include among others, the rule of law review and the EU Justice Scoreboard. And I would like to focus on them in my contribution into more detail. Both the EU Justice Scoreboard and the Rule of Law Report provide or are a broader part of a broader activities which aim to promote the rule of law in member states. And when it comes to the purpose, Viviane Reding, back then Vice President of the European Commission, said when introducing the first one that this is not a beauty contest, that it is not about ranking national justice systems, and here is where the title of my contribution comes from. The official aim, as it was declared by the European Union by the Vice President of the European Commission, is therefore that they do not aim to compare states with each other and determine the best of them, but that they are trying to promote the maintenance and development of rule of law, or I should add, to be more precise, some of its manifestations in the functioning of the state. So far, so good. Rule of law is important, and it is undoubtedly something that needs to be looked after. But my question is it really like this? Or is it a beauty contest in the end? I see that my presentation is not starting. The technique is...
It is the wrong presentation.
Excuse me?
It is the wrong presentation in the pen drive. It has 4 kilobytes.
So something is wrong then?
Yes.
Oh, sorry, I got some citations there, but, well, I can make it without it. But the very first thing that occurred to me is the question of legal basis. International organizations, unlike states, need necessary authorization for their actions. They cannot therefore set their own agenda completely independently, even though that it might be necessary. In EU law, this is clearly provided by Article 5 of the Treaty on European Union and the principle of conferral. So where is the legal basis for any EU activity in the area of rule of law other than the one in Article 7, which provides for that so-called nuclear solution in this area? Well, none of the provisions of the founding treaties explicitly provide for or regulate the process of assessing whether a state is a rule of law state vis-à-vis member states. Thus, the activities carried out by the European Union in the framework of the rule of law review cycle and the EU Justice Scoreboard have no direct and explicit legal basis in the primary law. The counter argument might be, well, it doesn't matter. The rule of law is important and is needed. You are great. Thank you so much. And now I have to find myself. I believe I'm here. Great. Thank you so much. I feel way safer if I have it in front of me. So the counter-argument in favor of the European Union might be, well, it doesn't matter. The rule of law is something that is important, something that is needed. But that's, I believe, not how the international organizations work. Such an approach applies to states, solely to states. Otherwise, we would be circumventing the will of people as expressed in the decisions of national parliaments when they express their consent to the content of primary law. And I don't think that this is democratic. According to another counter-argument which I found in the scientific literature and which is in favor of EU activities in the area of rule of law, the review cycle and the EU Justice Scoreboard, well, these arguments say, but these are soft law instruments. They are therefore not binding, and there are no direct negative consequences for member states if they do not comply with them. And as pointed out by Dore, she mentioned in her article, and I will have a list of references later in my presentation, but she pointed out that these instruments represent a soft law or soft method of policy coordination. And she was arguing, well, this is something better than the traditional supranational method of integration used within the European Union, so member states should be grateful for this approach from the European Union. Well, and this is certainly true, but this is also something that relates to the method of integration, and there is still no justification as what to exactly enables the EU to carry out this kind of activity at all. By the way, a number of various evaluations take place within my university where I come from against the faculties. And I'm increasingly getting the feeling that basically any federal type structure will sooner or later gravitate towards centralization. And for some reason, the center, and especially its administration, its officials working for it, they have this great pleasure, this passion or even obsession to evaluate others. And by the way, the evaluation at our university is ongoing, and it actually, when it comes to Faculty of Law, takes place today. So by being here, I'm exempt from this process and for this year, and I'm grateful to organizers for great timing. So thank you for that. But back to legal basis. The EU itself justifies the existence of its power to act through the internal market. And indeed, the functioning rule of law and consequently a functioning and efficient judicial system are a prerequisite for a well-functioning economy. This does indeed have an impact on functioning of trade and investment within the internal market, where the EU does have competence. But I believe that this is somewhat extensive justification. In fact, it would be possible to infer competence of the European Union virtually anywhere in any activity or policy. Let's take, for example, health protection. Healthy workforce is necessary for a good economy. Is it reason for EU to infer in this area? I don't think so. Doubts about the rationality of the justification under Article 114 of the Treaty of Functioning of the European Union, which is the core competence provision when it comes to internal market. So these doubts are further supported by the fact that the EU Justice Scoreboard is also reflected in channeling of EU financial resources to member states. And the amount of these financial resources is far from being small. So through money, which originate, by the way, in budgets of member states, the EU has a significant impact on the national setup and functioning of justice systems, of something which is clearly outside of its competence. Hence, my first observation, and perhaps even a request, if we want to preserve the rule of law assessment at its current stage, at the EU level, let's strive to ensure that it is properly regulated at the level of primary law in the next revision of the founding treaties. Personally, however, I would think that it would be more strategic for the European Union itself to state out of this idea. I know that it is hard to imagine at the current stage, but I believe that since all members member states of the European Union are members of Council of Europe, this matter can be handled within this international organization, and the EU itself could limit its activities only to possible negative consequences as they were identified within the Council of Europe. This has certain advantages, I think, since by doing so, the EU would be neutral in its relations to member states, and it wouldn't bear the negative consequences of bullying states. And the keynote speech, I believe, revealed that this is a problem, that this is perceived by some member states as a serious problem. So now let's have a closer look at scope of these two tools. Rule of law review cycle, later renamed to rule of law mechanism, is a relatively new instrument, only a few years old, that includes an annual report on the rule of law in all member states and a follow-up on this report with the European Parliament and Council. And its purpose is to ensure the early detection of emerging rule of law problems in member states. Thus, the Commission, as the guardian of the treaties, monitors the rule of law developments through mutual exchange of information and dialogue, including through a network of national contact persons. So personal views of various stakeholders are of great importance here. And the EU evaluates member states in 4 areas: justice systems, anti-corruption framework, media pluralism and media freedom, and other institutional issues related to checks. Not me, not us, but checks and balances. And I will not go into detail here. It would be too boring. You will see it in my chapter when it's published, but you can see that the rule of law is not covered in its entirety by this mechanism. And the evolution cannot be overestimated, but it's nevertheless of a considerable importance because it at least reveals changes in member states and current trends and current problems. The evolution report for individual member states are, in my opinion, too general to give a truly accurate and comprehensive picture in each country. However, if they were to be more detailed, then it would probably not be possible to carry out the evaluations on an annual basis. So the administrative burden would be probably too big. So they represent a sort of a compromise. The evaluation of member states also includes a list of recommendations, which is annexed to the Commission communication. And these recommendations, they are quite general. They are rather setting a trend or general objectives for member states concerned to achieve. Let's deal with the second tool, the EU Justice Scoreboard and its scope. The EU Justice Scoreboard is an older rule of enforcement, but not that old. It was launched in 2013. And unlike the rule of law review cycle, the justification of this tool is much more strongly and explicitly linked to economic factors, economic policies, and growth. What both mechanisms have in common is that they represent an evaluation on an annual basis. And in particularly in case of EU Justice Scoreboard, this frequency makes sense as it works with statistics, and they allow for an annual comparison. As for the relationship between the two, the EU Justice Scoreboard and the rule of law review cycle, so the former forms the basis and supplies data for the annual rule of law report. The EU Justice Scoreboard does not deal directly with all individual definitional elements of the rule of law in its complexity. It focuses exclusively on the judiciary and its functioning. And it does so through a combination of quantitative and qualitative criteria, as well as subjective perceptions of the courts and the independence in the society. And in particular, it assesses the efficiency, the quality and independence of judiciary. And this comparative tool is complemented by country-specific assessments, which are presented in country reports, which enable to make a deeper analysis based on the national legal and institutional context. However, the work of national courts is not assessed comprehensively by the European Union, as the EU Justice Scoreboard focuses primarily on indicators related to civil, commercial, and administrative litigation, and criminal litigation is touched only in the area of money laundering disputes at first instance courts. And quality of justice systems focuses on selected aspects of functioning of the justice systems. The Commission collects data on accessibility of justice for citizens and business, adequate financial and human resources, assessment tools, and digitalization. And again, more specific data will be in my chapter, since this is really rather boring. The EU Justice Scoreboard provides some valuable data. Nevertheless, it seems to me that there are some drawbacks or weaknesses as well. If you look into literature, and I try to cite it, I hope that you are able to read it. Butler calls for a more detailed evaluation mechanism, stating that the EU Justice Scoreboard focuses too much on technical functioning of courts. To be fair, the current situation somehow relativizes the Butler's conclusions. Commission has made some changes to the EU Justice Scoreboard, but the core still remains the same. Similarly, Jakab and Kirchmeier state that the EU Justice Scoreboard is currently too concerned with the financial guarantees and the infrastructure of judicial system instead of a holistic analysis of the rule of law. To put it directly, bad justice can be very effective and fast, which looks good in the data, but it still remains bad, which the EU Justice Scoreboard doesn't really reveal. In addition to that, the data cannot be overestimated, as they work with how the public subjectively perceives certain phenomena. And do I see a problem? Well, in different nations, we have different perceptions of satisfactions. For example, I come from the Czech Republic, and we have it in our DNA. We don't trust institutions, all institutions, and we have a long history in that. And this is somehow projected also in the way how we perceive the work of our courts. And of course, we are speaking about media, about politicians, and how they speak in public, in media, about the functioning of our systems. They affect the people and what they mean, what they think. So the methodology, I believe, is a problem here with the EU Justice Scoreboard. It's not unified in all member states. Well, control mechanisms. These two tools, they both belong among preventive tools, since certain systemic distortions cannot be undone and corrected once they have occurred. And well, we have discussed this thing yesterday during our dinner, and I believe that Poland has much to tell here about these problems. So the purpose is to identify, the purpose is the early identification of risks or negative trends in member states. And in addition to that, both tools can also serve as a great platform for sharing ideas and inspiration about among member states. So they are means of mutual inspiration and enrichment. And they are extremely valuable because they provide data for a given country in a time series, so you can see the developments. They therefore make it easier to evaluate and to anticipate development in a given country, depending on the measures that have been taken. And from this perspective, their role is unquestionable. Benefits of both mechanisms are obvious. So are the risks. I have already suggested that the data is really hard to interpret, even for experts. While writing my chapter, I came across an article that simply compared data mechanically without taking into the account the qualitative aspect or the methodology of acquisition of data and the methodology of the evaluation. Thus, this data can be therefore either unwittingly or deliberately interpreted by media or even by the opposition to promote their own particular interest, and that's the danger. Given the nature of the recommendations that the Commission makes to member states in these soft law instruments, the question is what the consequence of not following them could be. And at the EU level, actually, there are no such negative consequences. These are political instruments, not legal. I'm coming to an end, I promise. When it comes to sanctions, the situation here is quite similar. They do not impose any legal obligation, thus there is no possibility to sanction member states if they do not comply with recommendations. But since they are political tools, as it has been already mentioned by Katarina, they may have some political influence or influence on courts of respective member states. So they are not with any consequences at all. Coming to my conclusion, well, the question is, do both mechanisms really evaluate the rule of law in member states? The answer is yes, but only partially, only to a certain extent. They do not cover the rule of law in its entirety. Is it a beauty contest? Can we conclude from these two tools which state is successful and which is not? So the official answer should be no, this is not a beauty contest, but my perception, my impression from the reports itself as produced by the European Union, as well as from scientific literature, is that some authors and even the EU is making a beauty contest of these two tools. Does the EU have the power to make such an assessment? Well, I think that the competence is really difficult to infer. And a great deal of imagination, which I personally quite lack, probably is necessary here. And the last question, does this assessment make sense? I believe that yes, without any doubt. But the question is who shall do it, whether the EU, why the European Commission? And again, we have this little problem with competence, which remains. Well, thank you very much.